Welcome to Venison Headquarters. Today we're going to talk about how to make venison jerky. Nothing is a better snack than a nice hunk of jerky to snack on. Whether it's made of venison, beef, or other meat, jerky remains a favorite treat for people across the world. And it can be enjoyed in many different ways, in many different flavorings, with spices ranging from tiered jerking hotness to those of teriyaki and more mild and sweet tastes. Making jerky doesn't have to be hard. In fact, it is quite simple. Today we're going to show you a few steps and techniques that you can use to ensure your jerky is flavored the best way and tastes the best, whether you're preparing it with deer, venison, elk, bison, or beef. Visit our recipes at venisonheadquarters.com for additional information about how to make other things related to venison, deer, bison, and jerky. So today we're going to start by going over the equipment needed in order to make your jerky. First thing we need is a good knife set or an electric cutter or slicer. This is to prepare the meat to be cooked in the oven. The next thing you need is an oven, a food dehydrator, which is optional, or a smoker to use. Venison Headquarters recommends that you use an oven or any of these different things that we presented here under equipment needed. You don't need a dehydrator or a smoker. They are optional depending on the flavoring and the type of meat that you want to produce. Some typical ingredients that you're going to want. You're definitely going to need fresh venison meat. Uh, you also need venison seasonings or spices or marinades. So you can use any of these different types of things to flavor the meat before you're going to actually make the jerky. So the first thing we need to do in preparing for our jerky for in the oven or for the smoker or for the dehydrator is to cut the meat. And to do that, we're going to cut it with or against the grain. By going with the grain, it makes it easier to eat. By going against the grain, it's going to be a little tougher to eat and chew. You're going to want to make your cuts in 1/4 inch thick slices, and you're going to want them to be a length that's favorable to eating. So you don't want to make them too big, but you don't want to make them too small. One thing to follow is to keep your slices uniform in size and shape so that they're easy to put on a cookie sheet and easier to dry. In addition, before you cut your meat, it's always a good idea to partially freeze it prior to cutting, as that will make it easier for you to do. The next thing we're going to talk about here is seasoning and flavoring your deer jerky. And this is perhaps the most crucial part of the entire jerky making process. Depending on the spices, seasonings, and flavors you add to the jerky will determine how it tastes once it dries. So you want to experiment with these different spices and marinades and use a combination of liquid, marinades, and dry mixes. So in order to do that, you want to maybe take a couple different types and get a couple different bowls that you're going to be able to marinate your deer meat in prior to putting it in a dehydrator, oven, or a smoker. Always remember to refrigerate while marinating to prevent spoiling. And you can leave it in your marinades for several days. If it's a liquid, if it's a dry mix, it's best to be left in the refrigerator overnight. After you season the jerky, there are several different methods that you can use to dry it. We've already discussed some of these before. So you can use a smoker. If you're using a smoker, you tend to want to set the smoker at 150 degrees or go by the manufacturer's directions. When using a dry oven, it's best to use cookie sheets to place your strips of deer meat on before you put them in the oven, and bake it about 170 to 200 degrees for 4 to 6 hours. Make sure you leave the oven ajar to let the moisture escape. Otherwise, might find that it's harder for the venison to dry, and it won't taste as good in the end. If you leave your venison in a smoker for too long, your jerky may take on a bitter taste. So just keep an eye when using these different methods when you're drying your jerky. In a dehydrator, if you're using a dehydrator, please follow the manufacturer's instructions as to how to proceed in drying your jerky. After your jerky is done drying, make sure that you let it cool down at first at room temperature before you store it. Then you want to, with your hands, slightly bend, the piece of the cool jerky, and you'll notice that it will start to separate or break, and that's when you know that it's done. You want to make sure that the meat on the edges of the jerky can break off, but the center remains somewhat pliable. A word of caution, the United States Department of Agriculture, Food Safety and Inspection Service advises that all types of red meat be cooked to a minimum of 160 degrees Fahrenheit prior to dehydration in order to ensure that all bacteria and parasites are killed. One thing you don't want to do is forget to heat the meat up to the correct temperature, because you're not going to kill the bacteria or parasites that are living in them, and that can actually be harmful to your health. The last thing to know is that once all of this is done, you need to enjoy your meat. We thank you for viewing this video, and for more cooking tips on how to use venison and incorporate venison into your recipes, visit us at Venison Headquarters. That's venisonhq.com. Again, venisonhq.com. I'm Darren, and thank you for listening and watching today.